another episode of the DailyFlip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through a story talking about the energy starvation that the U.S. is going to go through, or at least in comparison to other nations, especially China. This comes from an opinion piece in the New York Times. Headline reads, Trump is obsessed with oil, but Chinese batteries will soon run the world. And the author himself is a fascinating guy. I actually have his book by Dan Wang, the gentleman who talked about how China is an engineering society and how the US is much more of a lawyerly society. But we can get into those distinctions later if they become relevant. With that, let's jump into our daily debate. Is the US bound to be surpassed only because we live in the realm of the previous and the infrastructure that we have built that made us the greatest nation on earth? I want to know your opinion. There are plenty of reasons why people think the US will be surpassed, and I have a few theories myself, but I want to know what you think on that specific question. And if you think it's something else, if you think there's another quality the Chinese have, or any other nation has that will surpass us, let me know. Throw it down in the comment section. But with that, let's actually jump into the article. I already gave you the headline, so let's jump straight into a quote. Quote, Chinese technology companies are paving the way for a world that will be powered by electronic motors rather than gas-guzzling engines. It is a decisively 21st century approach, not just to solve its own energy problems, but also to sell batteries and other electronic products to everyone else. Canada is the newest buyer of EVs, and it goes on to list why they are going to allow these products into their nation, these different cars that are no longer focused on a combustion engine, but one that is focused on magnets and electric motors. Where is China going to go from here? Do they have the ability to keep pushing the boundary on this front? Their population, this is, I'm addressing one of the main counterpoints. Their population is constantly dwindling. They don't have excess of labor. If they continue to lose population generation after generation, you can make an argument that they're going to be an industrialized society with robots doing a lot of the extra work. And I think that's a fair argument. But what has made them unique? It's the fact that there is so much labor, there's so many people that need to be pulled up out of poverty, on top of the fact that the high end of the economy, unlike the US, the high end of society are engineers, people who build things. The people to aspire to are not lawyers, senators. They're not people that talk about values and the power of truth and abstract concepts, much like a Western philosopher embodied in a lawyer, but rather a man like Jack Ma, who is a brilliant businessman, knows how to take advantage of the underlying discrepancies and problems within any given market, but also a one who is directly involved with the production of electronic components, and that's how he made part of his empire, among many other things. They actively ban the use or the large growth of VCs throughout their economy, or they try to limit large market firms that try to use that as a mechanism to make more money and to grow their own wealth, and even to grow the wealth of other countries, companies. Their focus has been not on how to extract money, not how to make money, not how to grow companies, but how to make products. And that has gotten them to the place where they are optimized for this new swing at a future that is less dependent on oil. Why is the US not capable of making that same swing, besides the fact that we haven't been building the electronics of the entire world for nearly 2 decades now? Well, let's leave that one aside because that's an obvious advantage. But why can't we also change our perspective? That's because in this country, the idea of energy, the idea of energy abundance, has become one that is polarized and focused on environmentalism on one side, and on the other side is focused on cheap energy that we know how to exploit. It is much easier to make an argument that we know how to make these oil refineries at a really, really cheap rate, cheap clip compared to new innovative technology, new solar panel farms, new wind turbine farms, and spending that energy and time will actually end up costing us when it comes to net output of energy. Of course, there is sacrifice that is needed to get to that future focused energy consumption and production. But you can see how in a world where these two ideas clash, and one in which it is no longer an issue of viability, of the constant growing nature of an economy, of our economy specifically, but it is one that is polarized and political in nature, how people aren't going to ever address the actual underlying issues. They're going to simply use the straw man arguments from the other side, where they're going to try to take it apart. They're going to try to point out where the other side is simply falling on faulty logic. I called out the Biden administration previously for not allowing the oil, coal. I believe there's another type of coal that's a little bit more brown in nature. I think it's called fume or frume. I could be totally off base there. If you know your charcoal, you know. But there are lots of restrictions on using this type of coal. It's a little bit more dirty, and yet it is just as lucrative when it comes to the power output that you get from it. And when they were restricting it, I was just as angry and frustrated as I am at the Trump administration when they're trying to slow walk and actively stop green energy projects. Regardless if you think that the green should hold more weight in that sentence, in that phrase, I think the energy project should hold more weight in that phrase. I don't care how we get there. I don't care how we get to the large amount of energy that we need. I don't care if it's geothermal. I don't care if it's nuclear. I don't care if it's gas. I don't care if it's coal. I don't care if it's wind. I don't care if it's solar. Okay? Put the politics of it aside. We need to produce energy. I listened to an episode a long time ago. I've brought this up multiple times across multiple podcasts. The commensurate rate of growth of a society very often goes in tandem if you put the population growth and their energy production growth. If you put those two graphs next to each other, very often they will align, and the population, if anything, will only be trailing behind the electricity, but not that far. We started as cavemen who could barely have enough energy to cook meat. And then we turned into societies that were harnessing energy from natural sources, that we were taking and exploiting the natural world in order to, excuse me, by the way, in order to fulfill our needs. And as we've been able to harness more of that natural energy and create our own, we are able to do more things. If you want to do it at base math, let's put it this way. If you could cook a single steak with a fire thousands of millions of years ago, whenever you believe we first came out of the soil, if we were able to cook one steak that is able to provide nutrients for maybe a family of 4 in order to survive. Now, in terms of quote unquote steaks, we can cook millions of steaks in order to help people survive, in order to provide the sustenance. That is the base math. The easier and cheaper you can make, and let's be clear, quote unquote, cheaper is a construct that we create, but in actual time and effort, that is the only thing that we actually measure, and money is a rough evaluation of that. But if you can make it more time effective and less effort involved, then you are able to make it more quote unquote affordable. You can make it easier. You can make it more accessible, whatever word you want to use, for the masses. And the more you do this, the more that you make energy cheaper, and the more that you're able to produce, the more that each person is able to exploit and therefore use to cook their own steaks for their own families. It's a very rough analogy, but I think it gets my point across. We are a society that is focused on surviving. The base thing that we need to care about is survival based on our need for food and water. And if you can make it cheaper to purify water, you can make it easier to purify water, and you can make it easier to cook steaks, and you can make it cheaper to cook steaks, then you are increasing the likelihood that we survive. And our imagination can only provide the maximum outlet of what will happen when we have a truly optimized energy society, when these fusion reactors finally come off of the ground. But right now, in the US, we're stuck in a political game. We're looking back at one another and saying, na 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 boo boo, your side's losing, rather than understanding that in order for everybody to have cheaper costs, maybe you're going to have to put your politics aside. Maybe you're going to have to put your preferences aside and understand that a full energy agenda, a all-encompassing one that does things that both sides are uncomfortable with because of the vested and entrenched interests, will actually make it easier for every single person to have purified water and a nice steak on their table. Maybe I'm a little bit crazy there, but hey, who would expect anything less? Thank you for joining me for this episode. If you want to read the article in its entirety, it'll be linked in the description down there below the like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Podcast Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post these episodes on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and 6 and 6 on Tuesday and Thursday. So with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.